Bible should be considered an accurate historical record of these events unless it can be disproved. Any other ancient document would be assumed to be true, but when it comes to the Bible, people deal with it just the opposite way. They assume it's folklore unless hard evidence can prove it to be true. Dr. Bryant G. Wood has good reason to sound confident, as he has found evidence that the walls of Jericho did collapse suddenly, and at the time the Bible said it did. But how did a former track star who received a BS in mechanical engineering become a who's who in biblical studies and archaeology? Born in Endicott, New York, Dr. Wood attended Syracuse University, where he earned his degree and several other honors before joining General Electric in Schenectady, New York, during which time he earned his master's in mechanical engineering. While studying the Bible, he found himself interested in the Old Testament and asked himself, are these real places? What do we know about them? He just had to find out. So he left GE and in 1974 received an MA in Biblical History from the University of Michigan. He also received a doctorate in Syro-Palestinian history from the University of Toronto.
And here is a photostat out of Time magazine. Score one for the Bible. Score one for the Bible. Fresh evidence supports the story of Joshua at the walls of Jericho. A professor at the University of Toronto at that time was the gentleman responsible for this research and for this article. Will you welcome, please, Dr. Bryant Wood.
Good to be here.
Good to have you. Now, the Jericho walls. I know we're going to take this week, we're going to talk about Sennacherib's prism. That's that big one out there. We're going to talk about the Dead Sea Scrolls. Are we going to talk about the walls of Jericho?
You bet.
When?
I thought maybe tomorrow would be a good time to get into that. It'd be nice today, I thought, if we could maybe back up a little bit and talk about the patriarchs and the time of Abraham a little bit.
Okay, now Abraham was on a journey of faith. Now, obviously, as a scientist, you have some background, I understood, in nuclear physics in some way.
Yes.
Which has helped you a great deal in the dating of these materials that are dug up in the Middle East. But I want to talk about your journey of faith first. Could we just take a couple of minutes right now? Because obviously you're on a journey.
Absolutely.
Tell us about Bryant Wood.
Yes. Well, I grew up in the States, in Endicott, New York. And I came up through the public school system, went on to college. I had the good fortune, I didn't have really much financial help, but I had the good fortune to have an ability in running. And so I had an athletic scholarship to Syracuse University. Otherwise, probably I would have never made it to university. But there at Syracuse, of course, I was indoctrinated with evolutionary teaching, scientific theory, which says that the Bible is nothing but mythology, folk stories. Now, I believed in God, and I had somewhat of a respect for the Bible, but I didn't have a lot of knowledge about the Bible. I had attended Sunday school at a very liberal church, didn't really know that Jesus died for my sins and I had to make a personal commitment to Him. But I heard that story, that message, when I was in college through my now wife, at the time girlfriend. I went to her church and she went to a gospel preaching church where I heard the message when I was a sophomore in college. But still I had this baggage, if you will, of all of the teaching that I had received all those years during schooling and at university about evolution and you can't trust the Bible, it's not historically true. I thought, well, perhaps there's a spiritual message in the Bible that I can accept, but my professors have told me I can't take the Bible literally. Well, as I continued on this journey, as you say, I began to investigate on my own some of these matters of science and the Bible. And I became particularly interested in archaeology. because I found that as I read the Old Testament in particular, it mentioned places and names of people and nations and so on that intrigued me. And I wondered, well, what do we know about these things? My professors have told me that this is all mythology, it's folk stories, but is there anything at all to this story that we read in the Old Testament? So I began doing, at first, my own personal research and reading in archaeology, and I found that these professors had been leading me astray. That in fact, when you dig into the findings of archaeology, you find that it supports the truth of Scripture all the way back to the very beginning of the book of Genesis. And so I started as an engineer. That was my training at university. And I did work for some 13 years for General Electric Company. But finally, God called me out of that into the field of archaeology.
How'd you know God did that?
Well, He gave me a very strong interest in this field. I became involved in a Christian ministry and biblical archaeology called The Stones Cry Out. Oddly enough, that's the name of our theme.
I think we borrowed it from you.
And so I was more interested really in this ministry and in archaeology than I was in engineering. And really I got to the point where I didn't want to go to work each day. It was just of no significance. I lost the interest, the desire to do engineering work. And so in 1973 I left General Electric Company to go to the University of Michigan and receive some formal training in archaeology and the Bible. And I thought, well, I'll go for 1 year. I could see how the Lord had provided for 1 year. I could take an MA program in 1 year. But God had another plan. He had a larger plan. And that 1 year grew into 2 years, into 3 years, into 4 years, until after 12 years, I received the PhD at the University of Toronto. I had no idea that I would ever go that far, but God provided 1 year at a time to continue until ultimately I got that degree.
Well, that's a highly respected degree, and your research, of course, according to Time Magazine, Science and Society, an article here called Unearthing the Promised Land. Again, Dr. Bryant Wood. Okay, you talked about Genesis, and Genesis says, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And obviously that would have been the very first myth or folklore story. And yet there it is. It's found in all those things that have been dug up, records of the creation story of the Babylonians and so on. It's all there. Every culture seemed to have a similar story, at least with some similar threads in it about the creation.
Yes, in the Middle East, we have discoveries amounting to tens of thousands of cuneiform tablets, clay tablets, with an ancient writing on it called cuneiform.
Yeah, I see this.
That name means wedge-shaped because they used a wedge-shaped stylus to impress the characters in the soft clay. And in Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, they developed writing at a very early time, around 3200 BC or so. And so they recorded mainly business transactions and that sort of thing. I cannot read cuneiform. I read Hebrew, but not cuneiform. That's more for the language specialists. My area is archaeology, pottery, and that sort of thing.
But do you know what they say?
Well, I don't know precisely what these documents say. These are examples of the tens of thousands that have been discovered. I say mainly economic in nature, but we have a few that deal with their religious beliefs, everyday customs, and these documents give us a lot of insight into life in the days of the patriarchs. And recorded on some of these tablets are creation stories and flood stories that are very similar to what we have in the Bible.
Now this one here, man, that's even before the cuneiform. It looks, that's a fish.
Yes, that's picture writing.
I mean, that really goes back.
That is the earliest known writing. It's Sumerian. And as you can see, it's a picture form of writing. In fact, we cannot yet read that writing. It's not until we get into the cuneiform, which developed out of that early picture writing, that we're able to decipher these ancient documents.
Okay, you talked about the patriarchs, Abraham's journey of faith. That's about the time of these writings here.
That's right, yes.
What about it? Have you discovered any archaeological evidence that goes back that far, other than you talk about the tablets here?
Yes. Well, we have evidence that goes back even before Abraham. Some of these tablets go back to 3000 BC. Abraham lived about 2100 BC or so. So we have written documents even earlier than the time of Abraham, talking about the creation of the world, talking about a great worldwide flood that came upon the earth. Even one tablet talks about kings who ruled for great long periods of time before the flood. And then the flood came, and then after the flood, kings ruled for a much shorter period of time, in agreement with the long ages of the patriarchs that we read about prior to the flood. There again, critics and skeptics would say, well, obviously the Bible can't be right when it talks about men living for hundreds of years. But we have an ancient clay tablet that talks about kings who ruled for thousands of years. So the Bible is very conservative, actually, in comparison to the ancient writings.
And so as a man of science, a student of archaeology, do you believe that the Bible is accurate whenever it says anything that relates to an historical event?
Absolutely. Every case where it's possible to verify a biblical account, it's been verified through archaeological discoveries.
Talk to me about this box now here. Can I just take some of these out and pile them here?
Sure.
I am very intrigued. Now, where biblical Sodom, I heard you picked these up. Tell me about that location and where and how you found these things and what they are. Now, what on earth would that be? You have got to have a good imagination now for that one.
Well, these are what we call sherds. These are just broken pieces, but to the archaeologist, each one is a part of a larger vessel, and each one can be dated. Each one was used in antiquity for a particular purpose. These are sort of like the pots and pans of antiquity, if you will, the plates and the bowls and the cups and saucers and so on, because they used clay to make their cooking pots, their storage vessels, and so on.
But how would you know you're in that vicinity of where Sodom once was located, that biblical Sodom and Gomorrah, the cities that were destroyed by the fire and brimstone, some kind of a comet shower or whatever it was that happened to just at the time when God said it would happen, to destroy these very wicked cities?
Well, traditionally, scholars have always thought that these sites were located somewhere around the Dead Sea. From the evidence we have in the Bible, we could locate them somewhere in that vicinity. For a long time, scholars believed that the cities were located beneath the waters of the southern basin of the Dead Sea. The southern basin is very shallow, and they thought, well, probably the cities were located there, and then when the level of the Dead Sea rose, it just covered over the cities, and we'll never find them again. That was until 1973, when two archaeologists were investigating sites east of the Dead Sea. And they were doing what we call a surface survey.
That would be in Jordan, modern day Jordan.
In the country of Jordan, yes. And in that survey, in the summer of 1973, they discovered 5 early Bronze Age sites along the eastern side of the Dead Sea. And all of these sites dated to the time of Abraham. I mentioned the early Bronze Age, archaeologically speaking, that's the time of Abraham. And they found that these cities had all been violently destroyed by fire. They had all been destroyed at the same time. So when you put that finding together with the information, the evidence we have in Scripture, we see that the findings match perfectly with the biblical description of the cities of the plain. Sodom and Gomorrah were just 2 of 5 cities called the cities of the plain. The pottery here is from the site of Bab-edra. That's the modern Arabic name for the largest of these sites, the northernmost of the 5 sites. And this is the site of Sodom. And this is the site destroyed by God.